and largely because MusicMaster, if you basically assimilate what we've heard up to now, there's one core central tool that's used underneath all of this. And I should just say this, Joe, because it's wonderful to have you here from Dallas, but more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, dig this. 11 years old, he knows he wants to be on radio. At 11 years old. At 16 years old, he starts an illegal radio station. At 16. So much so that he gets threatened to be shut down by almost like the equivalent of the FCC, right?
Well, it was the FCC, yeah. And actually, it was 11 when I built the first radio station that basically was reaching my bedroom. And I kept building amplifiers and better antennas until when I was 16, it was up to 1,500 watts AM and 3,000 watts FM stereo. And then I was shut down by the FCC.
Good for you, just do it. Incredible. So, Joe, give us some background, because basically you've always had the engineering bent. And what you wanted to do was to invent really, because you really were right behind the formulation of this, scheduling software. Tell us the background to that.
Well, my background played right into that, because I was a poor kid from the inner city of Cleveland, and my parents had no money at all, so I had to cut resistors and capacitors out of old TVs and radios that I got out of the garbage. And I found a magazine that told me how to build a transmitter, build your own AM station, and I had to put the pieces together myself. I did that because I wanted to be on the air and program a radio station, but I had to learn engineering to get the transmitter working. So through my career, I moved back and forth from engineering to programming. I did engineering because I did that well, but I wanted to do programming, and I always got fired. So I would go back to engineering, where you never get fired, and I would sit there for a while looking for my next programming gig. And back and forth I went until one day I decided I'm never going back to engineering. I got a job in Milwaukee, actually replacing Joe Benson, Uncle Joe, here in Los Angeles, on WQFM in Milwaukee. I was the new Uncle Joe, and I was not allowed to say that. I became the music director, and I got fired. So I looked for a job. I looked for a job as a program director, and I decided that I was not going to go back to engineering. So about a year later, when I ran out of money and my car was repossessed, I owed 4 or 5 months rent, I finally said, okay, looks like I have to go back to engineering, and I'm going to be the best damn engineer the world has ever seen. So I spent 4 or 5 years engineering, basically taking a toothbrush and toothpaste and cleaning the marijuana tar off of all the equipment and fixing all the broken cart machines. So I ended up in Milwaukee, back in Milwaukee, where I'd been once before, and I ended up back there building studios. That got me to be a studio building specialist. I ended up being the first person working on building the studios of Z100 in New York. While I was in Milwaukee, I was friends with the program director, and he knew that I had this programming background, and I was meticulous about scheduling music.
Right.
And I scheduled the music by hand for the radio station for the following day.
Right.
And I would spend 3 hours doing it.
Right.
And at the same time, I was teaching myself computers, which were new back then. Right. And I wrote a program to save myself some time. And
did this become the optimum goal scheduling system?
Well, what basically back then, music scheduling was an electronic version of the manual systems. There was an index card file or some other means, and it just copied that. And several years ago, we came up with a method that was revolutionary. Basically, with the card file system or with the old computer schedulers, the songs were chosen by elimination. It was, does this song pass all my rules? And the rules are very black and white. It's pass, fail, and they were not very flexible. And I remembered from actually being on the air and using a card file that if I dug from the front of the card file till I found a song that worked, that might not necessarily be the best song to play right now. So if I looked at where did I play this song last, and I would dig 2 or 3 songs deeper, I'd find one that hadn't been played anywhere near this hour or this day part for a long time. So I would choose that song. So optimum goal scheduling came out of trying to make the computer think more like a person,
Right.
and actually evaluate every song before making a decision and try to find the best possible song for each position. And it looks at things, in a completely different way. Instead of saying, I want to wait an hour and 10 minutes before I repeat a song by the same artist,
Right.
this system actually figures out what's the most amount of time I can separate each artist in a perfect world. And the closer we get to perfect separation for that artist, the better the score is for artist separation.
Right.
And it takes all these different scores. How long is it rested? How well is it moving through the day parts and the quarter hours?
Yeah.
And it takes all these and it weights those and comes up with an overall score.
So you do this also for jingles and sweepers as well.
You can do it for anything. MusicMaster schedules any object you want. So for television, it's actually scheduling graphic elements, bugs and pop-ups and crawls and things.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you're scheduling it for worldwide radio stations, TV networks, satellite broadcasters, cable TV channels, syndicated programming, mobile DJs. You're even doing it, effectively for anyone where programming is required. It's a very interesting, instead of calling Alexa or Siri, we'll call Joe.
Well, it's a toaster. And you basically put different pieces of bread and different types of bread in there, and you set the settings, and it makes toast. But basically, it manages music content for different platforms in different ways because it's very flexible. And so a pure play internet broadcaster or a one-to-one internet broadcaster like Kurt's service will, have different considerations when it comes to curating a playlist. If you're talking about, the background music at Whole Foods, if you shop at Whole Foods, you're listening to MusicMaster.
Right.
That's got to be managed in a different way.
Right. So this is a good point. Certainly, Kat and Biana, hearing first of all Joe has had to say, what Ed has said about metadata. So